introduce to, so Bryce is the executive director of the ITU Space for Good initiative and the Space Valley Foundation. And I had the privilege of knowing Bryce through one of the parents of one of our students. And it was just this moment of cataclysmic, like, what? Who are you? And how come I haven't known you my entire life? And it's been just such a pleasure to get to know Bryce, to start thinking about how the school of design can begin to imagine outer space. So with that, I am going to give you the mic and have you fill in your intro and then
well, thank you. So ITU is the International Telecommunication Union. Think of them as the mafia of space in Geneva. Formed in 1860, they were the governing body of radio frequency spectrum for the world. So they have 194 countries that are a part of it. It's absorbed in the early 20s, I think, in the UN system, so they're a specialized agency. And it's a very cool organization in terms of they have 3 remits that is still binding by treaty. Regulatory, standardization, and deployment through the developing sector. And so I get to go around the world and talk to developing countries of, please don't give away your orbital slots to other actors. Don't waste your spectrum if you don't have a telecom industry. All these different things that a lot of people take for granted. So the Secretary General of the ITU, also kind of analogous to the Secretary General of the UN, she is brilliant in expanding their reach because they do have 194 countries that look to them and are led by this group. And she created an initiative called Space for Good. And Space for Good, well, I want to introduce you, but we can go into what Space for Good is. And you know, one of the things that I'm looking forward to this conversation is really also understanding how we can all work together on this, because it's a very rare opportunity that we have to have 194 countries visible and active on an initiative that will go global like that in no time, and essentially rewrite the rules of how the world participates in space. It is a very heavy lift, but also a very rare opportunity to have that convergence of opportunity. So anyway, I will then make a quick intro of Anna. Her background totally dwarfs anything that I can say. Microsoft, Amazon, startups, gamification. The gaming industry, she's lived all over the world. Your knowledge is disturbingly amazing, how you can pull the most incredible quotes and piece together. When we met, she explained to me what Space for Good was, and I was trying to pitch her. So it was a much better thing, and also head of the School of Design here at Carnegie Mellon. So yeah, I'll let you fill in any gaps, but I am humbled to be in front of all of you, and I look forward to exploring a little bit more.
You are very kind, and I did not pay him to say that, but later, maybe. So Anna, head of school, professor at CMU, and I guess one of my favorite quotes is, "Curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought him back." And I think so much of the work that I do really is centered on curiosity, and most especially how we create communities of practice that are animated and propelled forward by purpose. And I'm going to tee up my first question to Bryce with a little bit of a preamble, thinking about where we are in the world at this moment, so fractured, so divided, and yet united by these technological superpowers that we have a very hard time tethering to the notion of goodness, right? It almost seems old-fashioned to talk about hope, to talk about altruism or optimism. And so my first question to you, Bryce, is Why Space for Good? Talk to us about your journey to the initiative and what you feel is really significant and perhaps challenging our audience to think about how they can participate in this global movement that you are launching forward.
So, thank you. I'm a lawyer by trade, unfortunately, and I did a lot of space law, and whatever that means, it's really just a mishmash of different things. It's supposed to sound sexier than it is, it's just law. And what was funny is during COVID, my wife and I were in upstate New York. We left New York, but before we left, I remember looking up to the stars, and stars for me has always been a place of solace. I had a very chaotic childhood, and in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, down the road here, and I remember always going out, especially on Christmas Eve, where I would look to the stars, and I didn't even know what intention was, but I would put something out there in the universe. And then fast forward, you know, that leap between that love of space and curiosity and hope to becoming an astronaut. I was terrible at math. I couldn't do, you know. So I was like, great. My lineage to space is dead. Fast forward, COVID hits. We're in upstate New York. I'm looking at the stars again, and I just had this thought. I was like, who's protecting space? And I got real angry. I was like, because if this gets screwed up, I'm gonna be really upset, because it's really my last pure bastion of hope. And that made me pull at this thread of like, well, I have a law degree, maybe there's something out there. And then I learned about the Outer Space Treaty, and I learned about Article 1, the province of all mankind. And I was like, wow, there's a legally binding structure that exists from 1967. Like, that's we could work with that. And then I started understanding about the space economy, and I went back and I got my MBA from Thunderbird for this new space economy degree, and I went heavy into startups, and I realized startups, you know, their rate of failure is X, but space startups' rate of failure is X squared. And what was failing wasn't the technology, it was the regulations. And that got me even more mad. And it takes a lot for me to get mad, but when I get mad, it's a really good igniter. And when I realized that our regulatory framework was killing the technology out there for these startups, that you had to learn about ITAR and EAR, you had to learn about a licensing process through the FCC, through the FAA, and that you couldn't get these licenses, you know, within a year if that was available. And some bureaucratic person that was, you know, inundated with licensing forms that had never met this technological flurry of licenses was just saying no, and shutting down really important dreams. And one that really stuck out to me, where I was like, okay, now I'm making this my life's purpose, was there was a company that came through that was a satellite imagery company that had figured out a way to use LiDAR. And they were able to look over the desert and find extremely deep wells for water that was going to change the humanity, especially for these communities that were drought-stricken and dying. They did everything right. They paid the attorneys all the money to make sure that they were compliant. They did all this other thing. And there was a government contracting agent who doesn't know anything about space that said no. They ended up having to rehire the attorneys, but because there was only a certain amount of law firms that existed that did space law out there, not mine, I worked for a little startup space law firm, and they charged $2,500 an hour. They went through all their money and went bankrupt. And to lose that technology that could be life-changing was just, it was absurd to me that they did the things, they did it right. And so that's when I was like, okay, game on, we're gonna do this. And so we started a nonprofit to help companies understand regulatory hurdles called Association of Commercial Space Professionals, and we built out regulatory boot camps. We did all this stuff. And then came the ITU, because I was like, that's good, but where's the real bottleneck? And it's in Geneva at the UN level, because they have to approve the top license. So I was like, get me into that. Great, we're gonna do that. And that's when the Secretary General announced Space for Good. And she tasked us with this very easy little lift. How do you onboard humanity to participate and shape the future of space? And it was, my team and I were just shocked. We're like, how do you onboard humanity to be able to shape and participate in the future of space? And so Space for Good, from there, we've worked backwards where, you know, we're initially focused on rockets and satellites, and we're focused on launch, and we're focused on STEM, and we're focused on all these other things, but you realize that even at the educational levels in some of these emerging nations, they don't even have that. They can't even, there is no educational system. And we go, well, what is the baseline for participation? And my team and I went back to this first principles, and we're like, well, the first layer of participation in space is looking up. Everyone's looked up since time immemorial. They have a story, they have a procedure. We move through this advancement. And what does that create? That creates wonder, a sense of wonder. And then we worked with a bunch of other teams, and we discovered from wonder creates hope. And from hope sparks imagination, and from imagination sparks innovation. So that's our equation, wonder to hope to imagination to innovation. And in that equation, anyone in the world can participate. And that's when I reached out to Anna, and I go, I have no idea how to design a global humanitarian platform to onboard the world to participate in space. And she was like, great, let's do it. And so we're now doing this, but we're at this phase right now where we want to open these questions up to everyone, because it can't be Western-centric. It can't be guys that look like me. It has to involve every culture. I live in New Mexico at the moment, Santa Fe, from the Pueblos and their celestial creation stories to the people that, you know, sci-fi, to the policymakers and the regulators. We need the whole lineage participating on said platform that can ensure that we have this blueprint in space. And so that's what essentially Space for Good is. Yeah, and I can stop there. So, as design, my question for you, and this is, we were just meeting before this, I handed this very easy problem: how do you design onboarding humanity to participate in shape of space? We have a design person that works for us, and she's like, you need an expert. And so, the thing that we have to realize is this is the first time in human history that we get to actually design the participation of a domain. We didn't do it with the ocean, we didn't do it with air, we didn't do it with the land, we just conquered, lived, survived, all this other stuff. But we have this opportunity to design participation in the first infinite domain and the last infinite domain of humanity that will shatter, you know, how we perceive the future of our species. How do you do that? And why design? And you know, you, with your history, when looking at such a gargantuan task, where do you start?
All the easy questions. Well, so thank you for that, and thank you for bringing me into your sphere. It's really inspiring to be inside something that is so audacious and so optimistic. So what Bryce and I have been talking about right now is really, how do we learn, right? And there are many examples of great global organizations that have global reach. What are those organizations, and how did they start? So I'm going to give a really a non-obvious example. So a lot of my work is centered on aging and longevity, and I've been privileged to be mentored by some really remarkable people across this country. And one of my heroes in this space is a woman named Ethel Percy Andrus. Does anyone know who she was? Anyone? Okay, so Ethel is a hero of mine. She was the founder of AARP. She was a remarkable innovator. She not only innovated across the social sphere, she innovated in terms of design. She was the very first person to create a universally designed model home that was situated on the Mall of Washington in 1961. That is how innovative she was. She was a peer to Jane Jacobs, right, of that same generation. And she founded AARP. She was a teacher, and she was visiting other teachers in her community once she had retired. And she was calling upon an old friend of hers that she had not seen for many years. And she discovered that this woman was living behind this derelict house in a chicken coop because she was so poor. There was no retirement for teachers at the time, and this woman was so poor that she was living in a chicken coop. So Ethel resolved to change this, and over time she developed an insurance system for teachers, retired teachers, and over time she built this organization into the organization we know today as AARP, which was one of the most powerful global organizations helping older people thrive. It is amazing to think of what she achieved from such a modest beginning. You also think about organizations like the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts, thinking about how they began. The Chautauqua movement is another great example. Another fantastic example are the Olympics. Who started the Olympics, right? How did that idea take place? How did they, take an old concept, dust it off, and make it into the international juggernaut that it is today? We know that there are lots of challenges and problems with the Olympics, but boy, the world stops when those figure skaters start to spin, right? And so what we're talking about is, how do we create institutions that transcend national boundaries? How can we create a sense of nationhood that actually expands across the globe, such that when we begin to contemplate the heavens begin to contemplate us, and we start to emerge with a renewed sense of hope that is actually global in scale. So I think the first thing that we want to do is to really study these global organizations and think about their moments of beginning, their moments of gestation, and how did they grow, right? Another example we talked about today is thinking about the fact that you can get a Coca-Cola pretty much anywhere on planet Earth, right? Like within 100 feet of where almost anybody is, you can find a bottle of Coke. Now that's neither good nor bad, it's a little bit of both, but boy, that's one hell of a distribution system. How did that idea happen? What is the brand of Coca-Cola, right? How did that global idea begin to ignite? And so a lot of the work that I'm fascinated by is looking at the intersection of cultural change makers, policy change, and product development. And when you work inside the Venn diagram of those three conspiring communities, that's when you start really cooking with gas. And I think that's where we really need to be when we start thinking about the ITU's Space for Good initiative. All right, so Bryce, what's our next most elegant step in this grand scheme?
Domination. It's funny being it's a gift and a curse to have the global scale at the tips of your fingers, because that's when we talk to a lot of organizations, that's exactly where they want to go, and we have it. We anything that you put in front of the ITU's members, it's like wildfire. It's actually quite insane, and I don't think they understand what they have in terms of that proportionality. So we're very intentional about the groups that we're bringing in. We were talking, not that there's anything wrong with MIT or anything like that, but we were talking to MIT and Berkeley and UCLA and ETH in Switzerland and KAUST in Saudi Arabia. And we kept coming back to Carnegie Mellon and the School of Design, because it's one of the few places that we've found the interdisciplinary approach actually being embodied. And so what we're now looking at is we're going to take this globally and take this interdisciplinary approach where we're going to start working with different institutions to say, hey, how would you design the first global platform to onboard humanity to participate and shape the future of space? How would you do that? And that is our first remit. We'll probably begin looking at in early December. We are very, very curious to talk to as many groups as possible from around the world, understand your points of view. when we look, and I'm sure you guys discussed this, but it's baffling to me that, especially in the U.S., that we forget the ontology of space. You know, looking up to the stars, we found identity, and then we found navigation, and we found storytelling, we found this, that, the other thing. And it's like, that worked, that got us here. So why aren't we recreating that? Why aren't we pulling those threads at every single level? And so that's what we're going to discuss. One of the great stories that I love is I was talking to the Senegalese space agency administrator, which didn't exist a couple of years ago. But he was tasked, as many anywhere in the world, just with providing STEM to their kids. And I think 60% of them are very rural farming communities, low levels of electricity and infrastructure. And he went out there, and you could imagine what happened with STEM, because it failed miserably. And so what he did was he purposely stepped back and he goes, who are my constituents? Who are these people? And they're still very tied to the stars from a spiritual standpoint. And so he got an old beat up school bus. He couldn't afford a new bus, but he's like, this is of the people. He knew that anything new would be seen as an affront or too gaudy to these villages. So he got a beat up school bus representative for the people, of the people, by the people. He had an astrophotographer, an astronomer, a shaman, and a storyteller on the school bus. And he went from village to village to village to village. First year, 5 villages. Second year, 10 villages. I think he's now up to a 3-month tour through Senegal. NASA's part of it, JAXA's part of it, ESA's part of it. And they have one of the highest conversion rates into STEM. Why? Because he went to the people of wonder, of hope, of imagination, and innovation. And it was this school bus, and then they built a space agency from that. And so it's to your idea, is the first principle, like, look at how these institutions capture that and understand it. In New Mexico, it's the same way. When we were tasked by National Science Foundation to merge, New Mexico has credible assets of war. We have Los Alamos, we know how to build bombs. We have few Air Force bases, Air Force Research Labs, Space Command. And then we have I think we're now the poorest in the country. The poorest, definitely we are the last in education. We beat Mississippi finally. And we have the most, the highest rate of pueblos in the country. Now, how do you merge these two? And so we were tasked with that with Space Valley Foundation. And that's actually where the Blueprint for Space for Good came out. Because what we realized through all these tests, again, STEM, we have 163 STEM initiatives for 300,000 kids. And then people realized these 30% of the kids don't even have access to transportation to get to the schools to institute these initiatives. And so what we're finding is a lot of people try to use this blueprint in these things without understanding. And then also New Mexico has their 10, 11 generational deep families there. And so trying to come in and say this will work without understanding the cultural aspects of these people who have been taken over from the Spaniards, from the Mexicans, from Native Americans, and then from the white man, and just this repetition of conquering and being conquered, it leaves a mark. It leaves a mark on you. And so once these communities started understanding that their perspective and their value and their relationship to the stars was important to all of these scientific findings, even if it was meant for war, the whole cultural narrative shifted. And I can tell you how many times I go to a university in New Mexico or an event, and every single person tells me, it's like, oh yeah, my dad, we looked up at the stars here, or they were part of the Goddard Flight Center, or Spaceport America, we helped plow the field and remove the ancient, the artifacts from the thing. And I was just like, my God, this is it. And so we're very, very conscious and purposeful with working with these groups to have that listening tour. So when we build this platform, it is really created from the ground up. We cannot institute our values on this platform.